little tune, you know, our classic dream tune. You know what's going down. Watch us. Beautiful music. Very nice. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're only gonna listen to this first song because the next one isn't as. Copyright free. It goes hard, man. Good stuff. Great stuff, in fact. Put a background music while we have a little chat. How are we doing, guys? How are we all doing? I'll tell you how we're all doing. We aren't. We are not doing. Or at least I assume we aren't. Because let's have a look. Right. I am the viewer. Hello, me. How am I doing? This is such an old picture. Kind of funny, though. You guys can't see it. It's fine. Wait, I can show you guys. It's from the stream. This is the stream. You can now see the stream on stream. But you cannot see what I'm talking about. Fuck. Shit. Ass. Okay, so there's this little watermark in the bottom. And it's my face. And it's funny, but it's a really old picture. Back when I was like 14. But it still looks quite a bit like me. So, you know what? I think I'll keep it up. Okay. That's plenty of that. Hey guys, how we doing? I am doing pretty good. I just came off from work. And usually I'm in a really shit mood afterwards. But actually, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty okay today. That's nice. I just had some food. I had a big old pizza. And it was fucking delicious. A great pizza. It was not as good as they used to make them. It was still pretty good. So, what are we gonna be talking about today? We got a couple things planned. We're gonna be talking about... Well, let's not start there. We're gonna start off by doing a little reaction. We're gonna be, first of all, we're gonna read up on the news real quick. You know, gotta be up to date. Very important. Very important. Then we're gonna do a little reaction. A interview from the I forget his name. Interviews by 1420. It's this guy who does like on-street interviews in Russia about politics, and he just asks random people their opinion. It's really good. I love it. I watch it every now and then. And you know, it's a good way to sort of see what people are like on the ground. I mean, you gotta keep up with the statistics, and you gotta keep up with the news, but you also gotta keep up with, you know, what people are like on the ground. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna keep in touch. Ooh, this, like this. So, balloons. I hear somebody here. What the fuck? The view. That's her. That's her. Ba-da-ba-da. Ba-da-ba-da-ba. Yeah. Good. Like it. Very good. So. Yeah. Oh, I'm hearing myself. Like it. Very good. So. Cringe. I don't like my own voice. Ooh. Biden's making some big talk. What did he say? I make no apologies. Biden says he's not looking for conflict with China and will meet with Xi. President Joe Biden plans to speak to Chinese President Xi Jinping in the future, following the United States' decision to shoot down a surveillance balloon and 3 other unidentified objects. Okay, so it looks like the unidentified objects the other unidentified objects were not from China, apparently. They're just balloons. And, I mean, they're just going gung-ho on those balloons, right? Biden is really the balloon popper. He's, when it comes to popping balloons, no one does it like him, and we gotta appreciate him for that. Because Trump did not blow up balloons like Biden did. He wishes, okay. He wishes he could blow up balloons like Biden. But he can't, 'cause he's weak. Low energy Trump. He doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know how to shoot down those balloons. He can't even shoot down a little birdie with a little BB gun. Okay. So that's a thing that you could say. Right here. Last 3 objects were not related to China's spy programs. Ooh. Putin meets with official at center of alleged Ukrainian children schemes? What the fuck? That, yeah, adds up. So they're really... Wagner is low on weapons at this point. God. This could go so many ways at this point. I want to hear about this fucking thing. What did Putin do? What'd he do? Putin meets with government official at center of alleged Ukrainian children's schemes. Now, what do they mean when they say scheme? Okay, because here I'm seeing she is at the center, according to those... wait. He met with Maria Lvova-Belova, the official at the center of an alleged Ukrainian government scheme to relocate, re-educate, and sometimes militarily train or forcibly adopt out Ukrainian children. Based! Very cool. Very nice, and such a normal thing to do. I'm always doing this in my special military operations. This is what denazification looks like, guys. Finally. Lvova-Belova, whose official government title is Commissioner for Children's Rights. You cannot make this stuff up. Has been sanctioned by several Western governments, according to those countries, and a new report by Yale investigator, backed by U.S. State Departments. Ooh. Little tiny little grain of salt. I'm sorry, guys. State Department, them's the rules. We're a leftist here. She is at the center of a Russian government scheme to forcibly deport thousands of Ukrainian children to Russia, often to a network of dozens of camps, I really think they should put the word camps in the title. I don't know, I feel like schemes, bit of an understatement, right? I feel like if you put camps in there, maybe this would be a bigger headline. I mean, people know about this, but I never hear people talk about it. I hear people talk about the fucking the bombing of Ukrainian cities, the shelling of Ukrainian cities, missile attacking all across Ukraine. I hear people talking about the summary executions, the wartime sexual assaults, the looting, whatever. You never hear about this. It was in the news a couple times back, I think in, might have been April last year. And then again, with the liberation of Kherson happening, that happened. A lot of children from Kherson were deported to Crimea, I believe. But I barely hear about it since. God. Lvova Belova was appointed to her position in 2021. Putin held a working meeting with her on Thursday at his Novo Ogaryovo residence in the Moscow region to discuss issues facing children in the Russia-annexed areas of Ukraine. Okay, so now we're getting to the good stuff, guys. You have been doing this for a long time, and I know that the amount of work is growing, said Putin in video footage of the meeting released by the Kremlin. The number of applications from our citizens regarding the adoption of children from the Donetsk and Luhansk republics from the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions is also growing. The Commissioners Institute has been dealing with this issue for a long time, almost 9 years now, yeah man. That sounds like a real thing that is happening and true. You know? Adds up. Lvova Belova told Putin about her plans for a joint endeavor with the Ministry of Health related to medical care for children in various areas. Guys, it's Kremlin propaganda, I'm sorry. If we're gonna take the State Department with a grain of salt, we're also gonna take the Kremlin propaganda with a grain of salt. I'm gonna go ahead and call bullshit on this. Lvova Belova also told Putin about the Trial Military Patriotic Camp she and regional leaders organized in Chechnya for 200 difficult teenagers who committed offenses or were registered in a juvenile apartment. She did not specify where exactly it was held, but said that the mentors for brave patriots who had been involved in the fighting. What? That's not a real sentence. Lvova Belova asked for more support to sprout the initiative and hold camps in different regions of Russia's Caucasus. We need more camps, guys! That's the problem. We did not have enough camps to put into teach them to be more patriotic. That's why there's all these Nazis. Because they're not putting in children in camps enough. That's the real solution. You know? Nazism. Just put some children in camps. I'm obviously not telling the truth when I say that. Don't put children in fucking camps, you giant lunatics. Thank you. Okay. Now we're all caught up. Not this guy. Let's take a look at this. Foreigners are very surprised that we are apolitical. Can you explain why people are like that? So, a little bit of context. There's at least a plurality. The numbers aren't fully clear on this. There's at least a plurality, possibly a small majority, of Russians who are by all means apolitical. They have outsourced their politics to Putin. Mainly because, and these are mainly the people who remember what it was like during the fall of the Soviet Union, what it was like at the end after the Soviet Union has collapsed, and the big massive crisis. They all remember that shit, okay? And they remember that Putin made things better for them, basically. Things got better after he got in power. Because, well, he was still pretty corrupt, but he was not quite as corrupt as Yeltsin. And he was also not a big fan of literally selling off the entire Russian economy to the Americans. He was also not a big fan of that. Didn't like that either. So, that's basically all he had to do to get these people's loyalty. And now they'll follow him into the grave.
Вот нас смотрят в основном иностранцы, и они нам задают такой вопрос в комментариях.
Foreigners in the comments are often surprised we have a lot of apolitical people. I'm gonna go ahead and... Oh, not that. Oop. No. Too little. Right. Yeah. That's right.
Вот. Но они даже не вопрос задают, они удивляются, что у нас очень много аполитичных людей. Вот вы согласны с этим мнением?
Не знаю, не вдавалась в эту тематику, не делала статистику, мне как-то...
Ну, можно про вас вот лично сказать, что вы аполитичны?
Нет.
Okay, guys. Let's play a little game. I mean, I know nobody's watching, so nobody's gonna play along. I'm gonna play it on my own, and I'm gonna have a great time. What do you think he thinks of Putin? Huh? You Putinist? I mean, look at this. Look at this face. She is obviously a Putinist, right? She's gotta be. She's gotta be a Putinist. I'm going Putinist.
Ну, то есть интересуетесь?
Мне интересно, что происходит в стране.
Ooh, that's what's happening in the country is interesting and important to me. Okay. That seems like a confirmation of my earlier guess that she's a Putin, because otherwise she wouldn't be saying what's happening in the country. She's saying what is happening in the country next to us, basically.
Важно.
Ну, вот, какой у вас вообще политический взгляд? Поддерживаете там Путина? Или...
Конечно.
Of course she does.
Вот мне часто люди попадаются, которые наоборот ругают его. Я вчера пытался целый день найти людей, которые скажут, что Путин хорошего сделал для России. Я всегда задумываюсь, так говорят.
Ну пусть все люди вернутся в 90-е и вспомнят, как люди жили, когда боялись выйти на улицу, идти с шапкой не привязанной, с сумкой и прочее, прочее. Не стало это все когда пришел Путин, правильно?
Yeah, that's the problem. Under Putin, everything did change for the better for the average Russian. Because under shock therapy doctrine, things were shit. And Russia, or Putin, did the most, basic things to keep an economy sort of going and give his people some kind of quality of life. Not because he wanted to be a good leader, just keep them in line, keep them in check. Whatever he could give them, it doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be good there. It just has to be better than what it was. That wasn't very hard. Because it was shit. Again, it was very much shit.
Вот согласны вообще с тем утверждением, что есть много аполитичных людей, или это скорее...
Да, наверное, так и есть.
А как думаете, из-за чего? То есть, в чем особенность нашей?
Ну, просто как бы жизни так разделены, власть отдельно, народ отдельно, как правило, и не всегда они связаны между собой.
Можно ли про вас сказать, что вы аполитичны, не интересуетесь политикой?
Ну, в какой-то мере так нельзя сказать, что совсем, но стараюсь держаться от нее подальше.
А почему стараетесь?
Потому что политики люди нечестные, неискренние и везде ищут только свою выгоду.
Yeah, okay, so I hear that a lot. I'm not interested in politics. They're all liars and whatever. I'm apolitical. A good friend of mine is completely disinterested. Very smart guy, you know, a real thinker. Completely disinterested in politics. I'm never gonna get through to him on that. And his reasons are, I mean, basically similar to these people. And I look at you know what they're saying. Just because politicians are dishonest doesn't mean the entire field of politics is invalid. That there's nothing to be gained there, that there's nothing to be learned there, that there's at least nothing to be watchful of, you know. At the very least, we gotta keep an eye on these people at the top, because what they do will inevitably affect us. And I think that a lot of Russian people are sort of a little bit more quiet about this. You know, because it is also scary to speak. And I do think that a lot of them do keep a little bit of an eye out on the news and on Putin, though they don't get good news, of course, there. And to a certain extent, the giant Russia Today propaganda machine wants them to be apolitical. They don't want them to be too involved in politics, because once you become involved in politics, have some political by argument, by evidence, whereas if you don't have any, just stay out of it and let the people in charge do their thing, because they know how it works, they get it, I don't. It'll probably be fine. Yes, that works, but if everybody did that, the world would implode.
Можно ли про вас сказать, что
Not
вы не
really, of course, but it wouldn't be good.
интересуетесь
Не
политикой?
интересуюсь. Так.
А из-за чего?
А зачем она мне нужна?
Ну вот люди, которые мне сегодня отвечали, ну, среди них были такие ответы, то, что нельзя не интересоваться политикой, потому что она влияет в первую очередь на тебя, на твою жизнь, на жизнь твоих родственников и так далее.
На меня она не влияет.
I don't let politics affect me, I live outside of politics. True, man, you're too old to be drafted. Yeah, that really is it. Just don't say shit about Putin and you'll be fine. Because that's also part of the strategy, right? Make it scary for people to talk shit about Putin, and they'll just not do it. Make it easier for people to be apolitical, they'll be apolitical. If you don't appeal to the political side of people, and when you're not in a functioning democracy, Russia not a function, teetering on the edge between autocracy and oligarchy, you lose that sense of having to appeal to the people because you do not longer need their approval. You don't need their mandate. It's just empty word.
Лично я живу вне политики.
Ну, есть такая поговорка, вы можете не заниматься экономикой, экономика все равно занимается вами. С политикой тоже самое. Политика все равно касается всех и каждого, если коротко.
А я не считаю себя политичной.
I mean, she's gotta be anti-war, right? It would give me some real whiplash if this girl was pro-Putin. That would give me some cognitive dissonance right there. I once knew a girl who was like a big Trump fan. She wore like a hairband with cat ears. That also made zero sense to me. That really freaked me out. How are you a Trump fan with cat ears? How? She was also extremely nice and would bake a cake whenever somebody had a birthday. But her political opinions were pure garbage and all informed only by Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder. She was constantly listening to the Steven Crowder podcast. So basically indoctrinated. God, I hope somebody pulled her out of that rabbit hole. Doubt it though. She was pretty deep in. She was a big, a big J.K. Rowling fan. I hope she's doing good.
А согласны вообще с тем, что у нас много политичных людей?
Возможно, но мне кажется, просто проще закрыть глаза на пипец,
easier to
который
ignore bad
происходит в
stuff.
стране, чем постоянно находиться в каком-то стрессе.
This is me. She's describing me at this point. Always feeling stressed and depressed because I keep up with the bad stuff. I don't know, man. I couldn't not do it. I could never not keep up with that stuff. I feel like if I'm to have any opinion on anything, I should keep up with the bad side of life. You know? I should know what kind of terrible shit is going on as well as what kind of good shit is going on. It's the same reason why I great atrocities. I think what bad politics, bad policy, bad advocacy gets you to bad outcomes.
И депрессии. Мне кажется, из-за этого люди становятся критичными.
Но вот не страшно то, что мы можем в какую-то Северную Корею превратиться из того, что...
Конечно, страшно.
Ну, то у вас какое мнение? Вам еще близки идеи Путина?
Нет.
Его внутренняя внешняя
Нет.
политика? Видите, что-то оппозиционное, да, нового хочется?
Более либеральная.
Vote for me as next president of Russia. The Russian Federation under loose is going to be the greatest country in the world. It's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, folks. And everybody knows that low energy Vladimir Putin. Okay. Everybody knows he's not going to be around for much longer. Okay. Okay, folks. Everybody knows. You know it. I know it. The Russian people know it. Okay.
Этот видос потом не пойдет Путину.
Считаете ли вы себя аполитичным?
Нет, не считаю.
Почему не считаете? То есть следите за...
He could be. Ooh, this guy. This guy's tough. Tough nut to crack. He could be like a super ultra fascist or just a normal guy. I don't know.
За новостями, за...
Да, получается, что я слежу за новостями, конечно же, потому что в первую очередь политика, ведь это управление государством. И мне важно
It's gotta be
то, кто управляет государством, как управляет, ведь от этого зависит, соответственно, ситуация в моей стране, ситуация в мире, и я считаю, что это очень важно.
Каждый гражданин в стране, он должен...
We
следить
don't
за
find
политикой.
out? What the fuck? What kind of cliffhanger is that, man? Dude, dislike. No, I'm kidding.
Или это не обязательно?
Я думаю, как минимум за внутренней, за своей обязательно. Как минимум в своем...
That's kind of a funny thing to say. When your country is invading another country. We must be interested in internal politics. I'd say maybe let's be interested in, I guess, more wider geopolitics. Maybe that is a good... Then again, you know, they don't have real good internet. Great firewall, they don't have the Great Firewall, but firewall. Very little stuff gets past that. They don't have the Great Firewall of China. Which is a funny thing. And it's funny that it's called that. Anyway.
В городе ты должен точно знать, кто твой губернатор, кто твой мэр, чем они занимаются, как они распоряжаются бюджетом.
Yeah, okay, well, so basically, everyone should know who their governor and mayor are, what they do, how they manage the budget. True! And based and truth-pilled and correct-pilled. You, my friend, even though you just said you should be only interested in internal politics, you should also be interested in external politics, but you are loose approved. Now, let's have ourselves a merry little Christmas. Or not. That's fine. That's okay. So, let's take a look at Vlad has to. This, guys, let me introduce you. This here is Vlad Vexler. I love this guy. He's a Russian/British political philosopher. Very smart. Reminds me of a friend of my dad. You know? Well, you don't. But. And he says we're finding disinformation wrong. He's gonna rant at us. And we're gonna take it like a good little slut. Okay, let's go.
Hello, beautiful community. We have to talk. And that's because my friend John Stuart Mill has come back from the past. He actually died in 1873. And he's been doing me a favor. He's been having a look at you, a look at this community, just to make sure that you're behaving. And he's given me a report. And he's actually got a problem with some of your behavior. And as a result, I'm going to have to put you, my community, on the naughty step for 10-15 minutes as we deal with this. This is very serious. So what John Stuart Mill has reported to me, and you've got to give him respect here. He's actually traveled 150 years from the past.
What a guy. Really based of John Stuart Mills. But if he says anything mean about me, I'm going to cry, scream, and shit my pants.
Is that some of you have been going around and calling contrary political positions to yours on the Ukraine war disinformation and misinformation. And he tells me that you've been calling these positions disinformation and misinformation because you think they're wrong and because you think they are really damaging and harmful. And he's just reported this to me, and I was completely flabbergasted that some of you have been misbehaving so much.
Of course, Vlad. Okay, so what does he mean by this? He's saying people have been labeling contrary opinions to theirs, which, knowing Vlad, most people in his community are pretty much pro-Ukraine. He is pretty pro-Ukraine, so these would be pro-Russian views. And they're calling that misinformation. Now, is that a ridiculous thing to say? Well, a lot of pro-Russian views are fueled by misinformation. That is true. Misinformation plays a great part in this war. But then again, false information that sort of bolsters the Western side, the Ukrainian side, the camp of NATO that favors them, misinformation that favors the West. Also very common. We see that all the time. And another thing that we see all the time is news that is not quite misinformation, but the way it's phrased is very much propaganda. I mean, back when, for the Leopard tanks were going to be delivered to Ukraine, you could see every day there would be a new article on the news of like, this Ukrainian tanker is just barely holding on in this old trashy Soviet tank that is trash and blah, and it doesn't work, and it barely even shoots, and it barely drives, and it runs on shit and poo, and he's all out of poo, and he's basically all out of shit, and it's just a big old disaster. You know? There was a lot of those articles. Just to get people talking about, oh, we need to be sending Leopards to Ukraine. Which, sure. I guess that's good. If that's what they need at that point, that we should be sending Leopards to Ukraine, in my opinion. But that is still propaganda. Still don't like propaganda. Overall. It obviously all political message is going to be propaganda. To a certain extent. It felt very dishonest. Let's just keep it at that.
So we've got to talk about it. And the way we're going to do the naughty step situation is that we're going to say something very sort of light first, and then we're going to get to the big point second. But the light point is in itself important enough.
Okay.
So let's start with it.
Let's do it.
When the Russians do disinformation,
Mm-hmm.
they typically don't do it in the form of seeding of factual error. They typically do it in the form of messing up our information environment, giving us contrary messages, trying to confuse us, trying to make us feel, well, we'd better get exhausted with this Ukraine war, we'd better get both morally and epistemically exhausted with it, because after all, it's getting harder to work out exactly why this is carrying on and why it's happening and why should we be doing this to prop up Ukraine. Surely it's time to think about giving. So
that's a really important point that he's getting at. And I appreciate that he says that, because a big part of the Russian strategy towards misinformation, particularly in the West, not as much locally, but particularly misinformation towards the West, is just a constant stream of any information. Any information. Because any information about war is going to be devastating for the average person to read, because war is hell. Or I guess, hell is hell and war is war, and out of the two, I would much prefer hell. Something like that. I don't know the exact quote. News out of a war zone is always going to demoralize people and is going to make people think constantly, are we doing the right thing here? Is there any possibility of ending this? And one thing that the Kremlin messaging has done very well is sort of push the idea of, yes, of course, there is a way out of it. It is completely in your hands, and if you would just stop supporting Ukraine and let us take over, or if you would just sign a ceasefire now, it'll be fine. Which is, of course, a lie. That's, of course, not true. And they wouldn't say it that directly, but they implicate it, right? That they're open to negotiations, they're open to a possible ceasefire, and then they break the terms of the ceasefire, because, of course, they were never going to stick to it. It was only to demoralize the Western audience.
That's the kind of thing Russian disinformation is trying to do. That's the kind of thing Russia's relatively minor disinformation campaigns during the 2016 presidential election in the United States tried to do. They weren't saying facts XYZ aren't facts, but something else is a fact that isn't. They were in fact saying things like, well, this is good, this is bad, this is terrible, and that's exciting and worth doing. And
it's just sort of a process of putting out as much contradicting information as possible to just make people think, okay, well, I guess nobody is right then. I guess it's all bullshit and we just don't know. To make people lose faith in their sources of information, right? Because if you contain sources of information with misinformation, that is a much bigger blow to the sources of information of a society than to just blurt out misinformation on your own. If you have any sort of small lie that you can sneak into CNN, that's going to do a lot more damage when it comes to, this issue, especially when it comes from a foreign actor. That's going to be doing a lot more damage than just saying lies and tweeting them at people or whatever, because it makes people think, okay, so I can't trust anyone anymore.
In the process,
and that's when they're going to look for alternative sources, and that is where the Putin propaganda machine really shines, because there's no shortage of pro-Putin pundits online. And they are very, very good at playing into the feeling of people have of what is true. I just don't know anymore. I just can't tell. There's so much misinformation out there. And they're the ones saying, I've got all the information. I know what's right. I can tell you. Again, it's this sort of belief in a strong man to follow that is just deeply ingrained in this movement that is essentially very much fascistic and very much collectivist. You know, Putin is citing the same thing to his claim to Ukraine. For his claim to Ukraine, he is citing Lebensraum. That's all. He's saying, okay, we need to unite all the Russian peoples. It's literally he's very Mussolini-pilled, the guy.
Says they were trying to exaggerate conflict, exaggerate tension, exaggerate toxicity that was already present in US political discourse.
True.
What does this mean? It means that we have got a real kind of concept creep that is creeping into our behavior, whereby we're going around and we are at risk of labeling things that are misguided positions we don't share, as though they were disinformation. But they're not disinformation. They are contrary evaluations to our own evaluation, you know? And they might be there because of error, or they might be there because of an intent to poison the informational environment by a certain agency or by a certain state. So you could call misinformation just stuff that's flat false, and it's swimming about without being a product of a clear intent to deceive, a clear project to deceive. And disinformation is misinformation with a politicized project to deceive or confuse attached to it. I mean, that's not good, but that'll do for the purpose of our conversation. Well,
okay, so basically what he's getting at, he's using misinformation and disinformation. We just need to distinguish flat out falsehoods from any truth that is, or not any truth, or any story that serves to further some political goal that is based on dishonest actors, or that is made by dishonest actors, but that doesn't necessarily involve flat out falsehood. You know, these are two different things. Which is true, and that is an important distinction. I'm interested to see where he's going with this.
Of what we find challenging isn't disinformation. It's not disinformation when Jeffrey Sachs argues we should stop supporting Ukraine. It's not disinformation when people go on the Joe Rogan podcast and say maybe we've helped Ukraine enough and it's time to wind this thing down.
Also true.
It's a contrary view. It's a view that happens to be contrary to my own view, and indeed my own view is to some extent even contrary to our current policies in the West, because I advocate an even more hawkish position of support.
Based! What a guy! I love this man. This is why you should be watching him. Look at this beautiful thing.
On this Ukraine conflict. I think we should do even more than what we're doing for Ukraine.
True.
And that's not because of compassion, but because of key strategic interests that are our strategic interests. True. And by the West.
You don't hear this a lot, because you often hear a more sort of appeal to, I guess, compassion, which is valid, because anyone with any form of empathy will see that what Putin is doing is deeply awful and completely unnecessary. But from a strategic view, it is extraordinarily dangerous. Extraordinarily dangerous, because the things that he is citing, says, this is why I'm invading Ukraine, those reasons are valid reasons. If you think those reasons are valid, then you think it would be valid for him to invade all the way up to East Germany, to get all old Soviet states back, conquers all that. That would be in line with the logic that he uses to say this is why we need to do this special military operation to Nazify Ukraine. which has, of course, gone disastrously.
I include Eastern Europe in this conversation. So that's very important. Let's not go around labeling as disinformation people who disagree with us and even disagree with us dangerously, because in the end, especially if they're fellow citizens, those people who are disagreeing with us, they're going to share a table of politics with us. Disagreeing painfully while continuing to talk and coexist and not trying to deplatform each other.
That is an incredibly important part of a functioning democracy. The ability to have disagreements is so important, even if they're affected by outside agents. And even if those outside agents are acting in bad faith. It is important because in a functioning democracy, basically the truth will out. People will find out what is true and what was the right position, and even if they didn't take the right position in the first place, which could have very bad consequences, it will at least affect their position in the future.
Is absolutely the lifeblood of democracy. Because when democracy...
This is why I love this guy. He thinks what I think.
He loses the crutch that is the crutch of civic belonging, where at least to some extent citizens feel, well, I have these different identities, but one of them is that I'm a citizen of this country. And that is an identity I do share with citizens who are my political opponents. Once you get rid of that unifying civic identity completely, and the United States is currently on the precipice of losing that.
Yes, very true.
You end up in a situation where your democracy will last so long as your institutions are resilient enough to cope with the toxic consequences of this loss of civic.
Exactly. A functioning democracy would function without a functioning democracy. Okay, so what do I mean by this? A functioning democracy, a well-functioning democracy, is so ingrained into people and so ingrained into society that even institutions that support it crumble, it would build itself back up. Whereas if that faith in the will of the people starts to break down in the mind of a population, that is when the only thing keeping the democracy alive, at that point the democracy is no longer a well-functioning democracy. At that point, that is a democracy on the brink of collapse. Because when people lose faith, all that is keeping it in power is the institutions. And institutions can suffer fates that are bad. No, that's basically what I'm saying. Institutions can be overthrown, mindsets cannot.
Identity. And that means that if your institutions are strong, they could last a decade or two, and then they'll collapse unless new solutions and new ways forward and new ways of civic engagement, civic connection appear. So it's very important that we don't do concept creep about disinformation and misinformation, and we confine it to matters of fact rather than to evaluations of the world that might be dangerous or wrong. This was just a small misbehavior that John Stuart Mill reported
I'm writing his dick so
to me.
hard. I'm sorry, dude.
He reported a much, much bigger misbehavior, and a kind of a much more innocent misbehavior, actually.
Into the big one.
But a more profoundly consequential one.
Let's see.
And that's that we are looking at people getting facts wrong and people thinking about the world outside the realm of factuality. In other words, people are now separating not into what we were just discussing, evaluations, interpretations, things that we don't want to call disinformation and misinformation. But things have got so bad now that people are segmenting into mental bubbles that are also fact bubbles. And large modern states have not got anywhere near developing a capacity to generate reasonable consensus on straightforward matters of fact. In fact, we are increasingly losing that capacity rather than gaining it. That's the trend at the moment.
Yes, I do recognize that. You see that everywhere. Just I guess, disability of a society to distinguish fact from fiction, and that gets played into by all sorts of factors, including possible censorship, possible manipulation of facts by any agent, whether it's a foreign agent, a government agent, or just some guy on the internet. Other things that play into this are like filter bubbles, algorithms on social media, including YouTube, contributes to this. And this is basically a global phenomenon, I think, in my opinion.
And what this means now, this second deeper problem, is now a problem where we will talk about matters of fact, where we're not talking about interpretations anymore, but we are actually talking about people either believing things that are glaringly factually wrong, or things that have just, as it were, closed the door on tethering to factual reality.
Which is again, distinguishing fascism. It's ideology that builds up to a point where it's no longer falsifiable. Build up this idea in somebody, and this has to happen slowly. Build this up, and slowly this ideology becomes their framework. It becomes their religion, right? It becomes their framework of truth. And so any evidence that sort of counters this is immediately, because it disagrees with their framework of truth. It disagrees with everything they believe in. So this is now inherently and very strongly tied to their identity. And this is now their truth. It is their truth. They believe it, and to them it is true. And there is nothing anybody can do to convince them of it. That's why, it is, when you're arguing with, it's not a game of, it's not a game of the other person. And in fact, in most situations, and that's why you largely shouldn't do it. You're not going to convince them, because they don't care about empirical reality. They don't care about it. It doesn't matter to them. So whatever facts you throw at them, the facts are not why they believe this. Their ideology isn't based on facts. It's not based on false facts. It's just not based on facts at all. Facts do not play into it whatsoever. So when you're arguing with a fascist, all you can do is make them feel dumb, and maybe they'll go away. And if you're arguing with fascists in front of an audience, that's the same thing, and then maybe some of the people in the audience will, hey, that's pretty dumb, that guy. That sounded pretty dumb. Maybe I should not become a fascist. That's basically the only positive outcome you can have. But maybe someone will hear it and think, That fascist sounded pretty dumb. I guess I should not become a fascist. But that is completely banking on your ability to make somebody sound dumb, which is basically a skill issue, right? You gotta be good at debate. So if you're not good at debate, absolutely in no situation ever argue with a fascist. Because if a fascist in a debate makes you look dumb, then that is actually a big, huge, giant win for them. So you should only ever argue with fascists if you're 100% sure that you're gonna win, you're gonna completely Ben Shapiro them, you're gonna go in there, you're gonna destroy them, people are gonna see it, and then they're gonna think, ooh, fascism, cringe, shouldn't do that.
And what I want to say here is that it's also wrong the way we are labeling citizens who are wrong in this way or detethered from factuality in this way as being, as it were, an expression of disinformation or misinformation. And you might say, well, hang on, you've just said that
No, they're not an expression of disinformation or misinformation. They are... Wait. No, I'm confused. No, I don't get it. I'm sorry. I'm lost.
We should confine disinformation and misinformation more closely to factual error. You are saying these people are factually wrong. What is wrong with saying that we've got a crisis of disinformation? What is wrong here, and this is the crux of what we're reaching for.
Maybe what he's going after, basically what I was just saying, is that disinformation, misinformation within these bubbles, they're not a thing, right? Just that whatever is true within a bubble like this is always going to be true to people in a bubble like this until they are out of it.
Is that underneath the crisis of disinformation, there is a crisis of trust. And we have talked a bit about different pathologies of distrust that we're seeing in the West. And I think there are 4, and I won't stop talking about them. The least worrying one is one that just says, I as a citizen feel unsafe with my political institutions, with my public institutions, with my public health institutions, and that's because I think they're incompetent. Yeah? So they're incompetent, I feel unsafe, is the first sort of view plus the cartoonish emotion tied to it. The second position of fracture of trust goes deeper, and it says, well, my institutions are betraying me. They're not just incompetent, they're kind of corrupt. Perhaps they're prioritizing the wrong people. They're not prioritizing me, they're prioritizing some others, maybe some outsiders, or just some others in my society who shouldn't get the priority they're getting. And
this
I feel betrayed
sort of a response
by them.
to institutionalized capitalism that you see a lot. This sort of this feeling of betrayal by a government, whereas a feeling of incompetence by a government, that's just an incompetent government. There's tons of those. There's a government that is betraying someone or its own people is a distinctly evil thing to most people, and also much more worthy of political unrest and possibly political violence.
So they are sort of traitorous. The third view point here is about powerlessness. So here I feel that my institutions are going on in whatever way they're going on. They might be incompetent, they might be, as I perceive them, corrupt, might be betraying me, but they're also untouchable. There's nothing I can do to reach for them. I try, and it's like turning a wheel.
Right, it's
in your motor vehicle.
A faltering of belief in democracy. I was talking about earlier.
The wheel's not turning. And maybe, yes, it's meant to be the case that voting or getting involved in politics at some level is meant to make a difference, but it doesn't. It almost feels like I just can't inflect the political process at all. It's just going where it's going, and I'm meant to have a sort of a 0.001% capacity to influence this stuff, and I don't feel it, and I don't feel anybody has it, and I feel it's zero. So that's the first three pathologies of mistrust, right? Feeling unsafe, feeling betrayed, feeling powerless, but none of them compare to the fourth and worst pathology of mistrust. That's the feeling of being lost. That's when you look upon your public institutions and you don't feel they're unreachable, untouchable. You don't feel that they are working against you, that they're inept. You feel that they're unintelligible. It's got to a point where this stuff is just bizarre and it makes no sense to me. And the image I use to exhaust you, because I've used it several times already, is an image of looking out onto a game of sport where three or four games are being played at the same time. Well, dishes is a good slip. It's like watching a kitchen situation where something is being prepared that is in fact a case of 4 different dishes mixed together that could not possibly work.
Okay, so to add to this a little bit, I think worth it to what is he getting at? Well, what I believe he's getting at here is the feeling that I believe a lot of us probably recognize. Look at your political institutions and you think, really? Really? This is how our society is structured? This is how it works? These people are in charge? How could that possibly be not even saying how could be the perfect way to structure society, because it obviously isn't. How could that be in any way a logical way to structure society? Why? Why would you do it like this? It makes no sense. It's so overly complicated. It's just so weird. I think we've all had that feeling before. And I think what is going to happen now is that Vlad Vexler is going to rant at us about how good for having that. I'm sorry, Vlad.
In any kind of constellation. And so it doesn't make sense what is going on. You are seeing chocolate mousse with gherkins in the same thing. I mean, what is this? I feel lost. This is not making sense to me anymore. It's almost like we've turned the page and the previous rules of politics just don't apply. So what is all of this? And that creates the feeling that maybe we can just get rid of it. Maybe we can just swipe and start again. And here, there's a very, very key concept, which is a concept of magical thinking. Yeah? And when philosophers typically talk about citizens entering magical thinking, what they're talking about is citizens entering a realm that goes beyond cause and effect. So, to make this cartoonish, the thought is that a citizen who hasn't given up on cause and effect will think, well, if I vote for that bunch of people, this is what they might do or try to do by those means in that time frame with the help of these processes and institutions, and these could be some of the results. So there's a kind of this could be wrong, but there's a bit of a causal chain here. So these ones are gonna do this with taxation policy, so I'm gonna go for those. So this is all thinking that could always go wrong, could always be wonky, could always be misreading, but it is thinking that is inside the frame of cause and effect.
This is very important what he's saying. You need to keep this in mind at all times. You are not thinking about the world in a way that is based on your actions, other people's actions, what effects they have, what effects those effects will have, etc., etc., then you're not thinking about politics in the right way. If you're thinking in the sense of great missions or deep values, great civilizational struggles, this is the mark of somebody who has lost touch with politics in a way that is functional and has discovered how to make politics to a tool for their own goals. Or not even their own goals, to a tool for someone else's goals, for the goals of the party, person, the great leader, the collective. And fascism is collectivism. Think in collectives instead of individuals is to think as a fascist. We need to ask ourselves the question, let's take a look at Marxism. Is it a collectivist ideology? I've heard that argument being made. You remember that Would Have Thought his video? It was like talking about Marxism as if it was the guidebook of the Soviet Union, which he then equated with fascism under the umbrella term of the great collectivist regimes of the 20th century. Now, the Soviet Union had many fascist tendencies, of course, and we've talked about this before, but this has nothing to do with the work of Marx. You know, it's easy to confuse a conversation on class relations, which are vital to understand thoroughly, to form good political opinions, with dividing people into little groups, each fighting each other for the ultimate prize, which is, of course, power. It's the difference between addressing the ways in which people mistreat each other based on their intersecting class relations, and weaponizing it for your own political power to unleash a violence on the belly of a people that is unmatched by any other form of organizing a state. I truly believe that fascism is a deep-rooted flaw of the human condition. Okay? And it's one that dictators the world across love to exploit. In fact, for many of them, the only thing really legitimized their reign is, of course, their reign is from all empirical, completely illegitimate. So the only thing that can legitimize this is the great civilizational mission of the collective over the individual, saying, I represent the collective. Not only am I part of the collective, I perfectly and wholly represent the ideas of the collective, values of the collective. I will fight for the needs of the collective. Right? It's the ultimate appeal to authority. It's a final deference to a guy at the top because he represents everybody, all the way down to the guy at the bottom. I would argue Marxism is not collectivist, though I can understand how the work of Marx can be, interpreted as such, because it is very ubiquitously applicable, Workers of the world unite. Sounds kind of collectivist. Easy to associate that with the idea that we are one as a people and that our cause is noble no matter what, and therefore nothing is off limits in pursuit of this, in pursuit of said cause. God, I gotta go to sleep. Of course, in fact, it means the opposite. There are no other groups. We are all workers of the world, and to think in collectives is to lose as an anti.
With magical thinking, something else happens.
Well, I really got off track there.
I want to vote that person in, but I no longer have any clear account in my head of what they're going to do for me, how and in what way. It's almost a feeling that all I'm doing here is just turning the page and hoping that something happens after that seems impossible today. So there is this magical thinking, but there is also this other kind of psychological trick, and that is a kind of distinction that perhaps is just an expression of magical thinking between past and present. Once we get that person in power, they will do X, Y, Z, and then politics will make sense.
Sort of the idea that the gaining of power by split reality into before, after, clean break, before, after, betting all on black, saying, okay, you know what, it's shit now, after, not be, it might be good. I truly, of course I don't have faith that it will be, but if I thought in this manner, I would.
Or then the politics that doesn't make sense will be given a good bonk on the nose, and that'll be good. But
I love this guy.
There'll be new possibilities, but I don't know how they're going to come about. Or we're going to have a referendum about whether to have one or another kind of relationship with the European Union. But if it goes my way, then something new will be possible. We will turn a page. And moreover, the way we get to this turning of the page doesn't matter. So we can kind of misbehave and beat up our democratic institutions on the way to this page turning event. So
this is
feeling of
he obviously but this is so incredibly applicable to Dutch politics. It is deeply interesting. European politics are a whole different beast from American politics, and it really is. American politics, you get a pretty firm understanding of American politics just by watching a couple American news networks, because that shows you basically what American politics is. It's not a democracy. It's a democracy-themed game show, and nothing symbolizes that more perfectly than watching MSNBC and Fox News next to each other. It is truly hilarious. It's very entertaining, also scary, and it is nothing very foreign to a lot of European people, which is why it is difficult for us to understand, but it is even more difficult for Americans to understand our politics. This democracy-themed game show, to them that is just, which of course, anyone who's grown up in a functioning democracy, I was lucky enough to grow up in a well-functioning democracy. You know, there are some cracks forming here and there now. It's looking pretty okay for Dutch democracy for now. And I grew up during times where democracy was functioning well. You know? It's interesting how different these things are, and it also makes me think, because of course I know very, very little. I know some things about Russian politics, and I know some things about Chinese politics, and I know some things, about American politics. I know very little about South American politics. I know very little about Southeast Asian politics. I know very little about, if there's even such a thing as South American type politics. Of course, South American politics, there is such a thing, right? There are some characteristics there, which I won't get into right now, because I haven't read up on them recently, so I don't know them. Hee But when it comes to African politics, what are the real patterns there? Just non-functioning states, right? That's not a real political pattern. What analysis can be done there? About, oh, there's 20 coups in a year. At that point, it's just a fight for power.
Of being lost, the feeling that you want to give up on institutions, the feeling that you want to give up on thinking in terms of cause and effect, the feeling that you want to have a sort of a magical separation between today and tomorrow.
Very dangerous.
All of that
Very dangerous.
is going on underneath a situation where a citizen is sitting there and thinking, this is true, when in fact we know that it isn't, that it's factually wrong. Or when a citizen is sitting there and not even saying anything false, not even persuading themselves that something that is terribly far from the truth is the reality, but kind of just imagining their political world in a way that simply no longer is in friction with a kind of a minimal tissue of factuality.
Right. Yeah? That is, so they've sort of closed themselves off from most empirical reality. Of course, you can't completely close yourself off from it. So you create a story in your head that matches up with everything that you know, and you make sure you don't know anything else. So that story can remain true. And if you find out anything else, you can change the story. It was always just a story in your head. And you can always just think, okay, well, I got that bit wrong, but the rest is still good. I'm still telling a good story here. It's still the right story. I'm still telling the truth here. Well, I would suggest you maybe venture out into the world. Make sure you find the information that might challenge your story, that might challenge the story that you. If you think something is true and you think about the world in some way, make sure to look for places that might disprove you. That if anything would disprove me, this would be it. That's the information you're looking at.
So what that means is that even when it comes to citizens who are saying things that are just wrong, right? Factually wrong, or who are thinking about their politics in a way that is detached from factuality, what is going on with them is a crisis of trust. And it's not a crisis of disinformation. The crisis of disinformation is a shallow misconception, right, as a label about what's going on. And so the bottom line difference is, if you understand this properly, then the cartoonish thought you end up with is there are processes of democratic degeneration in my society that I've got to think about deeply. Right? That's the right place to end up in. The wrong place to end up in, oh, some bad people are doing well politically, but that's because citizens are just being really irrational and really dumb and they should wise up. Some people are being irrational, possibly with the help of malign disinformation enterprises by foreign states. One pole. Another pole, there are deep mechanisms of fragmentation of trust in my society and real pathologies of democratic degeneration that I've got to engage with. And that's different to going around calling people irrational.
That is very...
So I think that the time is now the correct time for us to get off the naughty step, and John Stuart Mill will be very proud of us.
Thank you.
Really grateful to you for enduring this.
Much appreciated.
Because
and
I know
anytime.
this was off the cuff and not brief. Lots of love and talk very soon.
I enjoyed it. Lots of love back. And I will be talking to you very soon. I'm kidding. I don't know this guy. I wish I did though. That'd be cool. Yeah. That would be cool. So, guys. Brief intermission. Actually, not a brief intermission. We're going to this camera. Hello there. I'm going to be calling it for today because it is late and I'm tired. In real, I had a good time. Nobody watched, but it was fun. Mwah, kisses and love. Goodbye. Good day. Have a good life. I will see you guys soon again. Maybe tomorrow. I'll be off work.